Notice that you're wearing the actual light to attest to the value and the lightness of the product. How did you come up with this idea?
Thank you, Pimm. Yeah, I sat down with a friend of mine who's a solar engineer, and he talked about how the price point of solar panels is coming down, the efficiency is going up, and he wanted to make an airplane, and I said, let's start really small and talk about the people who do not have access to energy. And suddenly we came up with this idea of, storing what you can catch in the day outside in your garden and using it in the evening when you want to do your homework or you want to keep up your kiosk a little bit longer.
The countries in which the little sun is currently available, that is also part of the value of the light. It's not just a toy, it's to change people's lives.
Well, as we know, if you don't have clean and healthy light, you would probably be using kerosene, which is very toxic and very expensive and bad for the climate also. Right now we are in 8 sub-Saharan African countries bringing this out to the market. We're selling it, leaving the profit locally, but obviously we are living from selling it what we call on-grid, like here in America. So we're selling it in museums and online. And the profit from that goes into delivering the light into African neighborhoods, where there is also local salespeople, door-to-door salespeople, street vendors, women's associations, and they're doing a great job, bringing the lights out, but also making a little bit of profit from doing so.
You are an artist that not just plays with light, but also plays with the perception that people have of the power of art, the actual experience. You've described this as almost driving a wedge into what is a difficult economic system. I wonder if you could describe a little bit more about that.
Well, the thing is, as we know, energy is abstract, right? So we also know that understanding the climate is actually not as easy as one would think. So one of the things about, making things tangible is something that art has always worked with, right? Taking something which is relatively abstract and making it understandable or at least perceivable. So here you have something, if a child goes out, charges this in the day, and then reading your bedtime story by night, that child, I would argue, is more likely when the child grows up to make a decision which is based on renewable energy, once that grown-up has to choose energy for their own life. So art, I think, sometimes have an ability to sort of link thinking with doing or making something explicit, as I would say, taking it from being abstract and making it understandable. And as an artist, I find great satisfaction in showing ways of taking thinking and turning it into doing.
What has been the reception in places like Berlin, where you're based, and in Europe to the light?
Well, we've been very successful. And it's interesting that the language we're using is really the one of addressing what do we share? What is the same thing, in the northern part of the world and the southern hemisphere? And obviously the on-grid is typically the northern one, the Western world, and the off-grid is typically in the southern hemisphere, in rural Africa, for instance. And the language we're using and the perception has been based on sameness, meaning, well, this is about, having access to energy is about having access to power. This everybody wants. It's not just something that is needed in Africa. Everybody wants to, be a little more happy, have a beautiful design in your house, have, something so when your friends come over, they say, oh, wow, this is a cool thing. I want to have one too. And in that way, there's really not that much difference between Europe and Africa and rural Africa. And I think as a kind of a business point, that's very important to focus on what do we share instead of focusing on what is different.
Not only have you produced this light, but you've also produced light that comes through water, with waterfalls, changes in light. Talk a little bit about some of your other projects.
Yeah, I was lucky to, some 7 years ago now, I did the waterfall project here in New York in collaboration with the city. And this was a great project for me. And as we know, a waterfall is more than just falling water. A waterfall is also, when you look at it, you can see how far away it is, which means it's also a way of measuring the space, right? We know from a landscape, you stand in front of a landscape and you say, oh, I wonder, is that mountain an hour or a day away? And then you see the waterfall and you realize, oh, the water is falling very slow. Then you look at it and say, oh, oh, now you can see falling very slow, it must be very high, it's a high mountain, must be a day away. So a waterfall can indicate what is the space in front of you. That's how I came to the waterfall in New York. It was like kind of giving this space back to its city. These are the things I work with in my work. I work very often architecturally, spatially, with perception. I work very much with the people, with what is public space, what can we do on the street, what can we share, and what does public actually mean? Is it, is it just what's left when the private sector has kind of taken the nice chunks, or is it actually something which is more about the values that we have in our society? And that discussion I find very rewarding when it comes about art and creativity. What do creativity have to offer on the street, which is essentially out of which this grew as well. What can art do when it's outside of the traditional art institutions?